If you're joining us for the first time for our summit today, welcome along. We enjoyed such a great day yesterday, reflecting, thinking about the good conversations and our dinner with Chris Mountford last night. It was great to actually hear his heart and where he's come on his journey. So, Lynn, thank you so much for organising that for us. We're very conscious that we've got David Smith all the way from Grand Rapids, Michigan, zooming in very shortly, so we want to make sure that we make the most of his time. So just before Lynn says a few words and Jeff leads us into the day, can I highlight something I mentioned yesterday briefly if you were here? And that is the Millennials Project. You would have seen a soft copy of this emailed to you. We can provide it again, but we started to talk about, in Andrew's session yesterday, resources, and at our table we focused very much, as you heard me mention briefly, the great resource that our alumni are. And when you think of the 27,000 students in our schools right now who will be alumni over the next decade or so, it's an amazing opportunity for us to think about, to tap into. And can I encourage you, we're about to go to the second book of the Millennials Project. Alumni who have been out of your school for 5 years, who still identify with the ethos of the organisation, who are influential in their sphere of influence. And that can be anything. It can be the military, it can be the arts, it can be medicine and law. But, you know, our students go into ministry, a whole range of things, biomed, research. I'm amazed just in the Northside family of alumni, the influence that our students are having. We never know who's in front of us, do we? The students, whether they're in junior school or even right up in the senior years. So can I encourage you, if you don't know alumni, just ask your community. Your teachers will have dozens of stories. We'd love to, on your behalf, profile them. So can I encourage you, look out for that and take the chance to use that within your own school community as well. Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Leighton, and I just want to endorse Leighton's promotion of our ACS Millennials. It's amazing, the stories. If you haven't read them, please go in and read them. We will circulate them again. And the other thing that I got asked a few times about yesterday was the quotes about character that I sent out in yesterday's encouragement for the week, and the one from last night from David Brooks. The one from yesterday is from Anne Schneider's book, The Fabric of Character, which I circulated to everybody. It's an ebook, and it's got some really helpful, practical discussion questions around character in our schools. So I will circulate that again, and we've got a couple of articles from David Brooks as well that will circulate as well. I want to pay tribute and say a special thank you to Ruth Graverstein, who was volunteered and agreed very, very graciously to be our scribe for yesterday's discussions. So all the summary notes from and our action items that will go into our communique to go out will be courteous of Ruth. So please join me in saying thank you. Ruth is very detailed, so we're looking forward to lots of details, and I'm excited about today. This is a bit of a step out in faith with David going live and then Rob going live after morning tea with Helen. So really excited, and I'm going to hand it over to Jeff because I know he's going to do an amazing job. So welcome, Jeff Vanderfleet, Principal at Nambour Christian College. Thanks, Jeff.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you, Lynn, for your vote of confidence. I think I'll do a great job if I get out of the way and no one remembers who was MC today. Now, I wasn't here for the welcome yesterday, so please allow me just to run through a few things. And, of course, because I wasn't here, these are just the things that I picked up. Bathrooms are over there. You can't get out those doors. Because I tried to yesterday. Not because anything was wrong or I wasn't enjoying it. Anyway, so you can't get out those doors. What else did I work out? I worked out that we're supposed to wear masks while we're not seated. So when we're eating and drinking and being seated, we don't have to wear masks. But I worked out there's also another reason you don't have to wear masks. And all you've got to do, and you know this well, all you've got to do is get an NRL jersey or an AFL jersey. You can do whatever you like. In the whole of Queensland, it doesn't matter. Just do whatever you like. Actually, yeah, I've got to get out of the way. I'm sorry. It is going to be a great day. Now, we've got 5 really cool sessions today. I know you looked at your program and you went 5. You were hoping that the second day of a conference you leave early, weren't you? We've got 5 really cool sessions today. We've got a very special session with Dr. David Smith this morning. That will be just something that I'm really looking forward to. And if you read any of his work, I'm sure you will be as well. Then we follow that up with a really, really good session, which is called Morning Tea. And I think that'll be an awesome session as well. After Morning Tea, we've got a great session with one local guest and one, again, via Zoom. And that'll be around wellbeing and wellbeing at work, which will be fantastic. Another really important session is called Lunch. And I trust that that'll be and I say that seriously, and thank you for engaging in that seriously, because these events are wonderful, aren't they? Because of the connections we make. And we know that the pillars of ACS, one of the main pillars is around the collaboration, the fact that we have a fellowship, we have encouragement, that ecclesiastical idea that 2's better than 1. And when one falls down, there's an opportunity to help the other up. And so that's why I think morning tea and lunches are really good as well, because we build those connections, those things that are going to be important for us. And then this afternoon, Darren Island comes back and gives us an update of the exciting sort of next step in the project. So welcome today. And before I introduce David, can I ask you please, and I know I can, to just bow and let's pray. Let's commit everything that the Lord has for us today to him and ask his Spirit to lead us in a special way. Father God, we humble ourselves, we pause ourselves in your presence. We consider your goodness to us individually and collectively. We know that all good things come from you. And Father, we pray for goodness today in this gathering and with everything that's shared. We pray that ideas that come from your wisdom would resonate, they would be clear to us. That you'll give us the wisdom to be able to act on the things that you want to tell us today. Father, I pray for the people who are speaking. Pray that things will go well. Pray that you'll give them clarity of thought and stimulate our minds as we consider and perhaps even question some of the things that you want us to explore further. So help us, we pray. Father, I also pray for our communities as they are going about their tasks today. May your blessing be on them. May your kingdom come. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So Father, help us today, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thank you, everyone. Now, I've got to watch the time very carefully, and I believe that Dr. David Smith is ready to go, which is particularly exciting. I'll just give you a brief outline, and I'm assuming that some of you have read his work or come across him before, and so you probably don't need this, but just in case you haven't, I'm privileged to be able to say these things before he addresses us. So Dr. David Smith is Professor of Education and Director of the Kai's Institute for Christian Teaching and Learning at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He also serves as the editor of the International Journal for Christianity and Education. Now, by way of background, and I'm sure you don't need to be impressed by background, but if you do, you will be. He's originally from the UK, has a BA in modern languages, which is listed as German and Russian. Now, I'm an Australian. German and Russian being modern languages, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? But anyway, he's got a postgrad certificate in education from the University of Nottingham. He taught, which automatically gives credibility for all the educators in the world. He actually taught and then went on to gain his master's in philosophy of education and philosophical theology. He's got me with that. It's fantastic. And then a PhD with specialism in curriculum studies from the Institute of Education at the University of London. And he's taught at Calvin University since 2000. Now, There's obviously a lot more to Dr. David Smith than what the bio says. We get a little hint of it in what we've got in front of us. I've found, and I need to explore further, I'm sure, his writing is both insightful and accessible. I'm really enjoying it. I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Smith for introducing me to John Amos Comenius and the ideas that he brought to education that we're still building on today. I found that exceptionally helpful. I know that on Christian teaching is probably a text that many schools and many of you have used. And I've sort of almost finished probably the book that has led to this session today, which is Digital Life Together, the Challenge of Technology for Christian Schools. And in that book, if you've not come across it, you will find through every chapter, not just ideas and conclusions from research, but really stimulating questions that are relevant to our context. So I think that's probably some of the areas he's going to cover today. The book itself covers areas around technology with mission, pedagogy, discernment, formation, and community. All these things critical to our roles in our schools. So with that, I would like you to welcome, not to the stage, but to the sides of the stage, Dr. David Smith. Please give him a warm welcome as he addresses us today.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction, and greetings from Michigan, where it is yesterday evening, and looks like a bright sunny morning where you are. We're just heading into sunset here. As was just mentioned, what I'm going to focus on for this session is some questions around technology. Schools around the world grew faster than we thought it could in terms of moving to digitally mediated learning. And that's only accelerated the need to be having conversations about how technology is changing the way we learn, the way we're formed, the way we practice faith together. And I'm going to be suggesting repeatedly that part of what we need to learn in this environment is how to ask good questions about technology. And I'm going to start with a few big picture concerns, then I'm going to briefly describe some research that grounds what I'm going to share, and then I'm going to focus on some questions with some examples drawn out of schools as to what might make them good questions. So let's start with some big picture considerations. So let's start by getting clear what we mean when we talk about technology. It's a word that we throw around a lot these days. Here's one definition of technology. Technology is the application of knowledge and effort to create tools, means, and processes that help us achieve a specific end. This is out of one of the many pieces of writing trying to define technology. So it's the application of knowledge and effort to create tools, means, and processes that help us achieve a specific end. You need to get something done, you develop something to help you get it done. That's what technology is. So that basically means, obviously, that a computer, a laptop, a tablet, those are technology. But this also means that the colored pencils in your classroom are a technology. They're just an older technology, a simpler technology. The factory system and the power stations that make it possible for the computer and the colored pencils to exist are a technology. The transportation infrastructure that enables the pencils and the computer to get from the factory to your school is a technology. And as we start thinking about classrooms themselves, a red pen is a technology, paper is a technology, binders are a technology, tables, the nylon in your clothing is a technology. So the first thing I just want to say is that when we start thinking more systematically about what technology is there is no such thing as a school that is not teaching with technology. So it's not a very helpful question to start by asking, should we use technology or not? We're all using technology in a significant range of ways every day when we go into school. The meaningful questions are about which technologies we're going to prioritize, which ones we're going to introduce or not introduce, and for what purposes. But we are all teaching with technology. Now, in the literature on technology, we can see three main views of what technology is and how it functions. And depending which of these sort of lives behind your eyeballs, this is going to affect what kind of questions you ask about technology as you think about technology in your school. So a really common view of technology sees technology as basically a tool. Technology is like a hammer, a screwdriver. It's something that you use to get something done. You pick it up, you use it to complete the task, and you put it down again. Now, on this way of imagining technology, you're in charge. The technology does what you ask it to do. And when you pick up a hammer and pound a nail and put it down again, you don't expect to have been changed very much by the experience. You don't feel like you underwent some kind of life transformation and you now need counseling and therapy. You just pick the tool up, you pounded the nail, you put it down again. Now, if this is your basic way of imagining what technology is, then the kind of questions that you're going to tend to ask about technology are going to be efficiency questions. They're going to be questions like, does it work? How expensive is it? Is this particular instance of it good value for money? Does it get the results that are promised on the box? You're going to ask these means-end efficiency kinds of questions if you think of technology as a tool. Now, opposed to that is a second view of technology that says, no, technology actually, a lot of the time, it functions more like an environment than like a tool. Because a tool you can pick up and put down. But if you actually look at what happens with technology, we invent cars. It's a technology. And it looks like a tool for getting from A to B. But after a relatively short period of historical time, we find that it's changed the way we lay out our cities. It's changed our air quality and our health. It's changed where we worship. It's changed how we acquire food. It's changed how we signal status and pride and how we have midlife crises. It's changed how we tell stories and the kind of movies that we watch. It's changed how we consume music. It's changed what feels further away and what feels close by, and how families are distributed. And suddenly we find we didn't just create a tool for getting from A to B, we created a new environment that we live in, and it shapes us. So we are now people who live in a car culture, and that has shaped us in all kinds of ways. You invent a cell phone. And again, you could think of that as a tool for sending messages across a distance. But before long, you find that it's changed your sleep patterns, it's changed the way you navigate, it's changed the way you consume news. It's attacked your self-esteem in half a dozen ways. And again, there's this whole set of changes going on. The technology turns into an environment. So if you think of technology as a tool, you're asking, does it work? Will it get the job done that I bought it for? If you think of technology as an environment, you're asking, what's it doing to me? How is it shaping me? How are we turning into different kinds of human beings because we've built this technology around ourselves? There's a third view that says, well, actually, technology is more like a social practice. So we invent televisions. And one house in the street decides not to have televisions, does without. The house next door buys one television and puts it in the family room and decides to only use it for 1 hour a day and to only use it when multiple family members are gathered together to share the experience. The third house buys 8 and puts one in every room of the house and uses it as background noise for whatever's going on throughout the day. Now, those 3 homes are adopting the same technology in one sense, but their practices around that technology are different. They're integrating the technology into their lives in different ways, and so its effects in their lives are likely to be different. So on this view, technology is not just like a blanket environment where you've just got no choice, it just shapes you whether you like it or not. Technology here is mediated by practices. So even though we've got smartphones, we can decide whether to sit together in each other's presence looking at smartphones and scrolling, or whether to make eye contact and talk. We can build intentional practices. And that typically works best when we do it communally rather than individually. So often these practices are community practices. You can sometimes heroically as an individual push back, but it's pretty hard unless you're part of a community of people that's got some norms that you're following. Now, if this third view of technology is what's living in your head, then you're going to be asking questions like, which practices do we have around our technologies? What practices should we have around our technologies? How can we create a community conversation that leads to life-giving practices around the technologies that we're using? So first thing I want you to think about here is just what image of technology is your instinctive go-to one. When you think about tablets, when you think about phones, computers, whatever it is that you're thinking about using in your school, you think of them as tools for getting things done. Are you asking mainly about efficiency? You think of them as environments shaping us. Are you asking about who we're becoming? Or do you think of them as practices? And are you asking about community conversations leading to shared intentional practices? Okay, so much for the background. Let me turn to some research here. A few years ago, with some colleagues from Calvin University, we spent a number of years studying some Christian schools, elementary through high school, that were enthusiastic adopters of digital technologies in learning. And we wanted to study what was changing in the school culture. And this is what led to the book Digital Life Together that was mentioned earlier. So it was a K-12 Christian school system. They had a one-to-one laptop program, so each student was taking a laptop home. In the elementary school, after a few years, they introduced an iPad program as well. And we went into the school system and did a fairly extensive research project. So it was what's called a mixed methods research project, which basically means you don't just rely on one research method to tell you what's happening. You run multiple research methods and then compare the results to try to get a more confident sense of what's going on. So the mixed methods were, we carried out 75 randomized classroom observations. We visited 75 different teachers on different days across a year. We didn't tell them we were coming until the morning of, and we observed their class and took extensive notes and coded everything that happened in the class. We did multiple surveys of every teacher, student, parent, alumnus, administrator in the school system that we studied. We chose 6 teachers who had a reputation for being thoughtful in their technology use, and we did unit-long case studies of those 6 teachers so that we could see at least some things unfolding over time rather than just looking at snapshots. We ran 36 hours of focus groups with administrators, parents, students, and teachers to hear people's stories about what they thought was going on in their school community. And finally, we asked the schools for any documents or files or artifacts that they had connected to the history of their technology program. And they gave me 7 DVDs containing a little over 28,000 school documents, and I spent a year of my life reading them all. And we selected almost 1,000 that seemed important and coded them up, and they became part of the pool of data as well. So we ended up with a very large block of data about the life of this Christian school system. And we chose this Christian school system because we thought they were being unusually thoughtful about their adoption of digital technology. We thought this was kind of a best case scenario in terms of the schools we knew of that were approaching this very intentionally. They very much wanted to teach their students a process of Christian discipleship for living in a technology-saturated world. And that was talked about quite a bit. Now, I'm not going to be able to show you all of the findings in the next 40 minutes, but I'm going to show you a few. And I'm going to, again, back to this theme of what questions do we ask and what are fruitful questions to ask about technology in our schools. So a few findings and a few questions to go with them. Here's a first way in. When we listened to people in focus groups talking about what was Christian about the school and about their use of technology, we heard some shared language. They talked a lot about the kingdom of God. They talked a lot about discipleship. They had some shared Christian words. They talked about the need to teach Christian discernment. But when we started digging into the detail of the focus group conversations and the surveys, we found that different groups of people were focusing on different parts of what it might mean to be Christian, even though they were using shared language to talk about what was happening. Some of them really focused on student behaviors. So their concern was, how do we keep students from looking at porn? How do we keep students from cheating using the internet? They were focused on students' behavioral choices in relation to moral codes. Some had a slightly bigger view of that and were thinking about intentional practices. So they talked about media fasts, for example, and Sabbaths from technology. And they talked about teaching their students intentional practices with technology. So this is more proactive. Some were very focused on worldview. What ideas are students encountering through the internet? How do they relate to Christian ideas? Some were very focused on mission, the tool image, right? Are computers helping us to fulfill the Christian mission of our school, or are they not? Some had a very strong focus on formation. How is technology affecting students' faith formation, their spiritual formation? Some were very concerned about purity. This overlaps with the behavior thing, but there was this sense here of how do we keep safe boundaries around the school community? How do we keep false ideologies, violent material, sexual material, and so on from leaking in through the boundaries of the school through technology? So how do we keep a sense of purity around this? And finally, some were very focused on questions of community. One student said to us in a focus group, I feel like technology is making us better at connecting with each other when we're at a distance and worse when we're in the same room. So there's this question of how is it affecting our relationships and our sense of community? When we started breaking this down across all the different conversations we had, we found that teachers most commonly talked about behaviors and practices. That's not surprising. It's what teachers are having to deal with a lot of the time, is how do I encourage my students to behave in a particular way towards technology within the classroom environment? You'll see that behavior was kind of a concern for everybody, but teachers' behavior and practices were their most frequent go-to for talking about what was Christian about what they did. Administrators tended to focus on worldview, mission, and questions about formation. Again, the administrators were the ones with kind of the big picture, like what does our school believe and how are we getting there and how are our students turning out? Administrators were the ones with a sense of being answerable for what kind of student left the school. Parents really concerned about purity and boundaries. Many parents said they sent their child to a Christian school to keep them safe. So the parents were really focused on purity, and the students were really interested in community. That was their most frequent discussion point, was how is technology affecting the way we relate to each other, our connections, our relationships. Now, this is perhaps not per se astonishing, but I put it here just to raise this first question, which is sometimes even when you have shared Christian words in your school community and you're talking about your Christian mission and you're talking about discipleship and so on, it may be that if I could sit different groups of you down for long enough, I would find out that under the surface, you're actually looking in different directions. You're focused on different things. These are not necessarily incompatible things, but the question that comes out of this for me is when your school community communicates about technology, is there a shared understanding? Or are there shared Christian words that conceal different interests? And how might you have the kind of conversation that draws the different interests of different community stakeholders together and helps them to see that different people might be focusing on different parts of this? And we did see some signs of tension. For instance, teachers were aware that if the parents were very focused on purity, but they were trying to build intentional practices for engaging with technology, sometimes they felt this sense of tension, like, should I be just keeping my students away from stuff, or should I be trying to teach them how to engage? So again, how do you have those conversations across different stakeholders rather than letting Christian words conceal some of the different things that are going on? The administrators, I just said, were very focused on mission. This is not the actual mission of the schools, and it's not the actual name of the schools. We kept the schools anonymous. So this is a made-up mission that has some conceptual points of contact with the one that we studied. The modern Christian schools community exists to prepare the minds and nurture the lives of a student body that will bring change to the world for Christ. We pulled this apart from various angles and found a bunch of interesting things about how the school community was understanding this mission. But here I just want to focus in on one particular thing. In surveys, when we asked people overall, has the school's use of technology supported the school's mission or diminished the school's ability to fulfill its mission? A very high level of confidence that adding digital technology was supporting the school's mission. We broke that down various ways, but generally there was this high level of confidence, especially with this last phrase in the mission statement, that technology was helping us to bring change to the world for Christ. People talked about how it used to be that you didn't start changing the world until after you graduate, but now through blogs, through email, through Zoom meetings and so on, you can affect the world out there while you're in school. And this was quite exciting for a school community that was focused on bringing Christian change to the world. So they thought it was helping. And when we talked to students in focus groups, we heard examples of what this might mean. So one student said this: in comparison with another school, I feel like I have a lot more skills that can be used to bring change to the world. For example, I have a world cultures class. I just emailed someone across the world in Ghana, and I talked to them about my project and how we can fight the problem of stereotyping of people with disabilities in Ghana. So we're already bringing change to the world, and we're just in high school. So we heard examples like this from students, and students were quite excited about them, this sense that I can use technology to reach out, to connect, to work out my faith in the way that I connect with the world outside the school. Now, here's where the benefits of a mixed methods study become apparent, because we've just seen surveys say, yes, it's helping. We're hearing examples in student focus groups that say, yes, it's working. But we also started to notice in the focus groups that we were hearing the same examples repeatedly. There were like 5 or 6 really exciting stories that cropped up more than once in the focus groups about great things that were happening. So we also compared this with the classroom observations. Now, you'll remember we went into 75 classrooms across a year, 75 different teachers, 75 classes. And across that time, we observed 479 distinct teaching and learning activities in those 75 classes. You might just want to predict here for a moment how many of those 479 activities involved connecting actively with the world outside the school. So not just reading a text that came from outside, but actively connecting with the outside world. Over a year of searching, we found 6. And of those 6, not all of them were using digital technology. So suddenly we had a more mixed picture, because administrators were very confident that this was something the school was very good at. It was something that was happening. The surveys said the school community believed it was happening. The focus groups said that there were some good stories circulating. The observations suggested it wasn't as common as people thought. We need to maintain this purity boundary. So a student said, if there's a website that has more inappropriate content, it's blocked for us. And I think that's reasonable, but sometimes some bad stuff comes up. And we mainly either exit out of the tab or we scroll so that we can't see it. Now, students had internalized this sense that there were boundaries, that if something comes up, you close your computer, you make an adjustment. And they'd internalized this sense that there were some things out there were bad on the internet, they've got to avoid them. But listen to this student talking about why it's great to work with laptops. Sorry, the administrator first, about the problems with students using laptops in school. The administrator said, I was always surprised every time we get a complaint about porn or that kind of stuff. I was always shocked that we never fielded a complaint about materialism. And if the laptop truly degrades the Christian walk, I think materialism is a far greater danger to the vast majority of the Christian school crowd. We literally one time caught a kid with porn at school, but catching kids shopping during class all the time. We were able to confirm this with our classroom observations. Indeed, it was very frequent to see students sitting in class with shopping sites open on their screens while the teacher was talking. In fact, here's one student describing for us why it's good to learn with laptops in school. In some ways, it's good because you can obviously type faster on your computer. You can take notes faster. You can share them faster and email faster. Also in that class, because once you get your notes done and the teacher's talking, you can go shopping or do whatever you want. You've got a student here sitting in Bible class, and they're saying what's great about having a laptop is I can go faster, and that means I've got more time to go shopping while the teacher's talking. So my question here, are the community's concerns focused on a few moral issues, pornography, plagiarism, or is there a broader awareness of the process of formation? Are you thinking, for example, about consumerism as well as sex and violence, and about how that relates to our use of screens and our use of devices? Because we found in our focus groups that while there was lots of concern about porn and violence, our research suggested that actually the student body in these schools were doing better than the national average, including better than the Christian national average for their peer group, as compared to a wider population in relation to accessing porn and violence. It wasn't completely absent, but it was lower. The school was having some success in discipling students to use technology responsibly. But we didn't hear much in the focus groups about what we were seeing every day in class, which was students sitting looking at shopping sites while they should be focused on learning. So again, are you focused on one or two issues? Or are you thinking about formation in a broad way? Here's two students in a focus group telling us about how teachers give them homework. The first one says, we'll ask our teachers, can we just skim through for the answers? And they'll say, no, I actually want you to read it. And like one of my teachers did that, and I diligently read it and took notes because I just do that. And I know a lot of people did because he actually emphasized that it's important to read it. Whereas most teachers I get, I kind of skim it and look for the answers. The second one says, in other classes, they just say, here's your reading assignment, and then fill out the worksheet. And it's easy to just do Apple F and find where the answers are to each of the questions. These two paragraphs of student responses have fascinated me for a while because they're trying to tell us two different stories that can't both be true at the same time. So here's the first story they're trying to tell us. They, teachers, that's us, they'll say, no, I actually want you to read it because teachers are virtuous people who care about deep reading and deep learning and careful reading. So they'll say, no, I actually want you to read it. I am a virtuous student. And so I diligently read it. I take notes because that's just who I am. I'm just such a great student. I just read carefully. I take notes. So the first story is about virtuous teachers, virtuous students who both care about deep learning. In the second story, it's actually only one of the teachers who says anything about how to read the text. In fact, they, down at the bottom, most teachers just say, here's your reading assignment. It's just one teacher who actually emphasized that you should read it carefully. And it turns out the teachers are not quite as virtuous as they sounded. And it also turns out that when the teachers are not virtuous, the student's not virtuous either. Because when the teacher's not emphasizing how to read it, most teachers, I kind of skim it. I just go looking for the answer. So, two stories. One in which teachers and students care about learning, one in which teachers most of the time just say, here's your reading assignment. And students skim read. Now we can compare this with some survey data. We asked students, how much do you agree the way technology used in school has done the following? Has it let you find answers without really understanding them? The two dark blues are agreeing. So we've got a majority that say technology has helped me find answers without understanding them. Has led me to look for quick and easy answers to problems. A larger majority is saying yes. Encouraged me to skim over material even when I know I should be reading carefully. A third are agreeing with that and another third are not sure. Now, just to fill out the picture here, because we were quite careful in our book, actually, this is not a book against technology. We're just trying to understand what's happening. The same students said that technology had helped them to understand difficult ideas in their class and that it had helped them develop ideas that went beyond what was presented in class or in the assigned materials. So there are positive and negative effects going on at the same time. It's not a simple cut and dried, it's good for you or it's bad for you. There's a complex of things going on here. Now, this for me immediately triggers something I mentioned earlier. I immediately want to start asking what kinds of intentional practices will increase the positive effects and decrease the negative effects. And we've just seen evidence that if the teacher just says, here's your homework, get it read by tomorrow, and the student has a technology that lets them search quickly for the answers, chances are we just increased the negative effects. Now, we saw quite a bit of evidence of this. Question, is technology in conjunction with school culture reinforcing a focus on efficiency that undercuts deep learning and genuine interpersonal engagement? Now, this draws on, there's been past research on how schools tend to encourage a task completion mentality. One of the things students learn from school is that what teachers most care about is getting things done on time, getting things turned in, getting things checked off, answering all 8 questions, reading to page 27, getting to the end of the essay. And that we care a little bit less about the learning and the transformation that's taking place along the way. And the instructions we give tend to be about task completion. Now, when students internalize that task completion mentality and start to believe that what we really care about deep down is getting stuff done, they start looking for shortcuts, quicker ways of getting it done. And it turns out that technology, digital technology, offers a whole bunch of very powerful shortcuts. You can search for the answer without reading the text. You can search for the answer and copy and paste it without understanding the answer. But those kinds of shortcuts are actually also preventing learning from taking place and engagement with the material. And if you step back and you think about formation, what kind of future church members are you forming if their approach to texts is just to skim through and scan through and search for the answer and not to actually read carefully and deeply? A teacher said this: a student emails you and they say, well, where are my grades? We just took the quiz 5 minutes ago. Another teacher: someone turns in something a month late and you take a week to grade it and they say, where's my grade? Do you have my grade? Communication expectation, another said, is almost sometimes instantaneous. We're in a service-oriented business. So you do it and keep parents happy, but it's 3 o'clock and the message is, I'm picking up my daughter at 3:05. There's an expectation, I think, I don't know if it's from the school, certainly from our parent base, that I am on all the time. I just feel like because of all the technology, the communication is so constant. There's never a downtime. And we've fed into that. I think it's hard to navigate because everybody feels like we need to be reachable at all times. Like it's not okay to not answer your cell phone. Let's let those quotes sit for a moment. Because another thing we observed was that as these schools worked hard to be transparent, to communicate well with the parent community, they were also increasing the amount of email, increasing the amount of online information that people were accessing, increasing online access to grades, leading to, for example, student behaviors sometimes of checking grades very frequently online that probably were not that healthy. And there were these emerging behaviors in the community that were built around the assumption that communication is instantaneous. That if I send a text at 3 o'clock, even if the teacher is teaching math, they will see my text before 3:05. Now that's just a parent not thinking, but it's this implicit expectation that because I sent a message, somebody must have seen it and somebody must be about to reply. Now, a few things here. Very often the business world has figured out some strategies around this. So often if you write to a help desk for some kind of computer product, you quite often get a message back that says, we try to respond to all queries within 36 hours or however many hours they've chosen as the reasonable turnaround time. The schools that we were studying had not done that. There was no agreed set of boundaries around what was a reasonable level of communication. And what that was creating for teachers was this sense that it's not okay to not communicate. Because as we listened to people in focus groups, what became clear was that everyone felt like everyone else was doing better than they were. Everyone felt like everyone else was keeping up with their email. Everyone felt like everyone else was answering parents really promptly, was helping students out with homework late at night. And this was having a number of effects. First, it meant it turned into a kind of arms race where everyone was trying to keep up with the story that they had in their head about what everybody else was doing, because it wasn't being talked about. And so there was this gradual ratcheting up of the amount of communication that people felt was expected of them. There was a sense of not knowing when the workday finished. It's not so long ago since teachers would go home and they might have some grading, but their day would end. Now it was becoming ambiguous for teachers. If a student emails me needing help at 10:30 at night, am I still at work? If a parent emails me at 11 and turns up at the school gate with the expectation that I saw their email and thought about it already, is that a reasonable expectation? We heard some teachers talking about strain on their marriages because of the amount of communication that was going on outside of school hours. And part of what was driving that communication was that these teachers were all extremely conscientious. They wanted to do the best they could by the parents, by the students. They were the kind of teachers that are not going to say, no, I'm not going to help you now, if a student sends them an email at 10:30 at night. And there was no agreed community boundary as to when the school day ended, when it was reasonable to communicate. So that's what these teachers are alluding to when they say there's never a downtime, and we've fed into that. Or everybody feels like it's not okay to not answer your cell phone. By the way, I'm here to tell you, just in case you need somebody to tell you, it is okay to not answer your cell phone. An administrator said, we're inherently valuable as spouses, as children, as parents, as siblings, but also as children of God. You're not just a teacher. Do not believe that lie. Do not be here all the time. Go home. That's a concern of mine. Because this Midwestern culture of do, I'm still coping with that, to be frank. It's busy here, and I do not want to create a culture where my staff believes they're only what they do, and the lesson plans they create or don't create, and the experiences they give. We need a larger picture of what life is, not only in Christ, but giving to their families and their friends and their communities. And so do not just be the teacher who's here 12, 13, 15, 16 hours a day. That's not good for anyone. So question, are you having whole community conversations, or are you establishing shared wisdom about proper boundaries and the stresses created by the increase in electronic communication that we're building our culture around? How do people know when it's okay to stop and they're not being looked at critically for not communicating within a certain time frame? How might you host those conversations? What might be a reasonable set of expectations? And I think this is quite important, not only because, as I said, I was hearing people talking about strain on their marriage, and that has to be part of your concern as a Christian school leader, but also because as a teacher educator, I'm starting to have the experience of sitting at the back of classrooms and watching teachers teaching and explaining something for a few minutes to students, and then giving them something to work on in small groups. And then instead of going over to the small groups to help the student, they walk over to their laptop to see if any emails have come in the last 10 minutes from parents or from students or from administrators that they need to deal with. That to me is just profoundly misguided. Teaching is difficult when you're fully engaged, let alone if only half of you is actually present in the classroom. We need to find ways of having a moratorium on communication when students are in class and when teachers are in class. They need to be focused on each other. They need to be focused on learning, not on what's coming in over the email. There's lots more questions in the book. I've just scratched the surface here. Digital Life Together is the name of the book. If you want to explore more, you can explore that in the pages of the book. We looked at a whole bunch of different facets of school, and I've really just picked out a few here. But what I've been trying to do as I pick these out is to suggest to you that it's easy to be too focused on too small a set of questions. Do the laptops make the math scores go up? Does the filter keep pornography out of the school? Those questions matter. They're okay. They're not terrible questions. But what we found as we spent more and more time in these schools was that there were surface questions like that, and there was other stuff going on under the surface, like this creeping focus on efficiency and cutting corners and getting stuff done, or this creeping octopus of too much communication that was affecting relationships and stress levels and people's ability to live well together, or shopping, consumerism. And it was striking that when students talked to us about pornography, they did so with a visible sense of shame, whereas when they talked about shopping in class, there was no sense of shame at all. They thought this was totally normal because they had learned that the internet had good things and bad things. And the shopping site is not an internet bad thing, it's an internet good thing. So I'm not doing a bad thing if I look at the shopping site during class. So even this underlying question of what kind of mental models are we giving to our students for exercising discernment in relation to the internet? Is it just there's good things and there's bad things? If you avoid the bad things, you're good? Or can we create a more complex set of discipleship practices than that? I think it's really important what questions you ask, because once you start asking a question and pursuing it, it directs your attention, it directs your energies. Before long, it directs your resources. And you start not paying attention to other questions on either side. So I think the question underneath everything that I've shared that I'm really gnawing away at is, how do you become the kind of school community that is able to continually ask good questions about technology? Because the pace of change is not going to go away. And what we noticed as we studied the 28,000 documents that I got from the schools covering a 10-year period was that when the schools first adopted laptops, there was this huge upswell of deep discussion, really good discussion, found some really thoughtful stuff in those documents. Theology and talking about student learning and community and all kinds of things. And then over the next few years, things gradually became normal. And before long, I started to see the same paragraph pasted from one year's documents into the next year's documents. I could tell because it had the same typo pasted across multiple years. Until the iPads came along, and suddenly there was this big community discussion, and everybody was back to talking about discernment and discipleship and so on. And then the iPads became normal. And when we were in the school, we talked to some teachers who had recently been hired, who'd just joined the school and who weren't there for the big principled discussion that happened 5 years ago. And they said, we've never had any training about this. We just got given a laptop cart and some tips and told to start. And so there was this tendency to go in fits and starts, to have really thoughtful community conversations that lasted for a few months, and then it became routine. So how do we become the kind of communities that are capable of sustaining conversation, not just about what we can use technology for, but about how it's changing us, who it's turning us into, and what kinds of intentional practices we can build around it to maximize the good effects and minimize the bad effects. I'm just going to finish by pointing to a couple of resources. Pedagogy.net is the website of the Kaiser Institute, the Kaiser Institute for Christian Teaching and Learning. You'll find various resources there. Teachfastly.com is a website that we built for science teachers and Bible teachers. There's a couple of hundred lesson plans on there for connecting faith and science in constructive ways in science classes and in Bible classes. Whatiflearning.com is the same thing, but across the whole curriculum. There's 100 examples across there of teachers connecting their faith to their teaching in the classroom. OnChristianTeaching.com is where I post the stuff that I'm writing from time to time, and Facebook.com/OnChristianTeaching is where I post updates. So if any of those are useful, jot them down, go visit them. You can expand what I've talked about by going looking at some more examples. But I think at this point, that's about what I have to share. I hope you actually heard all of that. Strange things started happening for me partway through, so I'm sorry if it was a bit disjointed, but thank you so much for listening.
Dr. Smith, we want to thank you sincerely for giving a good insight and an overview of your work and your book, and I do recommend it into school communities. Now, if your dinner's not sitting on the stove simmering away, I think we've just got a couple of minutes in case someone does have a question from the floor. I know that your book poses questions for us to consider, but perhaps someone here has a question that they'd like to ask in this moment. Thank you.
Wondering if you heard back from the schools who you did that work in when they read some of your research, how they responded?
Yes, we actually, before we published the book, we took everything we'd written and we actually put together a little group representing the school, and we had them read everything we'd written to basically tell us whether there was any point at which they felt that we were being inaccurate in the way that we described them. So everything that we wrote was reviewed by both administrators and classroom teachers at the school before we published anything. That was important to us. It's another way of checking the validity of the research. Just because you've got data in front of you doesn't mean you can't make up stories. Now, having said that, shortly after the book was published, there was quite a significant turnover in school leadership. And so we'd actually planned to go back into the school and do some sessions with the schools, and that ended up not happening because of a whole bunch of changes that took place in the schools around about the time when we were due to do it. There was just too much turmoil going on in the schools. So we've had less follow-up conversation than we had originally planned for. But what we did hear back when we did that member checking, when we ran it past people in the school community, was both that they recognized themselves and also that it had helped them to see that there were some things they needed to think about and talk about more, that they thought they were being intentional about, but it turned out they were being intentional about some things and not others, and that they wanted to loop back to some of those things that were more unconscious and have better conversations about them. So yeah, that's probably about as much as I can tell you on that score.
Hi, David. Nice to see you again. Friend of Shirley Hoekstra, Jeannie Trudell from CHC. A quick question. In the study that you did over 10 years, what's the role of social media in the classroom with students and also teachers and parents? Could you comment about that? Thanks.
Yeah, we could. There was a lot of concern about social media. There's a whole section on this in the book, and I didn't touch on this here this evening, but the school was using both filtering and monitoring, right? So if you're familiar with the distinction, right, a filtering system just tries to keep out bad websites. A monitoring system actually traces if students access a website they're not supposed to, and it triggers a warning on somebody's console. So they have both a filtering and a monitoring system, and social media was blocked for during school hours, during learning hours. And it was available via the system that laptops were hooked into in the evenings, but it was not accessible to students during the school day. So that actually set up this slightly odd situation where, along with pornography, parents were quite concerned about social media, but in fact, it was quite difficult for students to be distracted by social media during the school day. The distractions that were happening during the school day were either video games, or shopping sites, because they weren't blocked by the filters. And we saw quite a lot of distraction behaviors around those, but it wasn't as commonly social media because usually those things were blocked. Now, of course, every student claimed to know another student who knew ways to get around the filter and so on. This doesn't mean that students weren't wrapped up in social media, but it was happening more outside of the actual learning environment, was our sense from observations and from what we could tell from interviews and surveys.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Any other questions?
David, just while we have you, would you mind just giving us a taste of your broader work as well at Calvin and in the institute that you work at?
Sure. I've got my finger in way too many pies for my own good. I actually have 3 jobs right now at Calvin. I train teachers. I teach in the education program. I teach curriculum. I also direct the Kayers Institute for Christian Teaching and Learning. The Kayers Institute, as its title suggests, is focused on what Christian has to do with teaching and learning. There was actually a survey a few years ago in Christian colleges and universities in North America of over 2,000 Christian higher education faculty that found that while 80% of them believed that their Christian faith had something to do with their worldview and had something to do with their ethics, and had something to do with their motivation for being in education. Only 40% saw a connection between their faith and the way that they taught in the classroom. So a lot of the conversation about Christianity and education, about faith and learning, has tended to be a conversation about ideas. It's been about getting the right Christian ideas in your head. And it's been less a conversation about teaching and learning processes and how Christian beliefs about human beings, about the world, about community, about the way we function, how that might affect the way you go about teaching and learning in a classroom. So that's been the focus of a great deal of my work, and it's a big focus for the Kairos Institute, and a whole string of books that we've put out is what does faith have to do not just with what we teach, but with how we teach, even in the moments when we're not actually quoting scripture or saying something Christian. What about the actual classroom processes? And how are those shaped? And what kinds of formative effects do they have on students? I hope a little of that has come through in what I've shared today as well. But I'm very interested in the choices we make as teachers, how they shape students, and what faith has to do with all of that. I actually have a third position right now. There's a new institute just started at Calvin called the Degrees Institute, which is for faculty development for Christian higher education worldwide. And we're developing online courses for faculty around the world who teach in Christian institutions to think about faith and learning. And we've got about 300 faculty from a number of different continents working through online courses with us this summer. And we're going to be continuing to expand that over the coming years. So most of my work is focused in one way or another around faith and learning questions.
Thank you, Leighton. That's a terrific question. Can I just, we're going to have to wrap up now. Can I just get some sort of visual indication of the issues and the questions that David's been talking about? Are they relevant in your community, in our community? They very much are, aren't they? Absolutely. And I love the fact that we're talking about not just surface questions, but the big questions underneath them. And I think there's a great stimulus there for those of us in our communities that are trying to frame responses to the way we do things and to groups within our communities. And I think it's just been a tremendous stimulus for us, something that we can take and probably revisit back in our context, but also perhaps have some musing on over our first break, our morning tea. So can I ask you please again to thank Dr. Smith in the usual way. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Of course, if David was here, he'd get a gift. So thank you, David, for the gift that I'll accept on your behalf quite happily. Anyway, we've got a morning tea break now. We're back here at 10:30, so enjoy the moment, and yes, we'll talk to you soon.